How is it that we find ourselves surrounded by such complexity, such elegance?
The genes of you and me, the genes of you and me, are all made of DNA. We're all made of the same chemical DNA. We're all made of DNA.
Hi, you're listening to DNA Today, a podcast and radio show where we discover new advances in the world of genetics. From genetic technology like CRISPR to rare diseases to new research, we have you covered. For a decade, DNA Today has brought you the voices of leaders in genetics. I'm Keira Deneen. I'm a certified genetic counselor and your host. This is a milestone episode for two reasons. As you may have noticed, it's our 200th episode. Technically, we had about 20 episodes prior to numbering them, but these are mini lessons and not really full episodes. The full episodes started when we were broadcasting live from WHUS 91.7 FM, and our episodes are still played every Friday on WHUS. The other milestone is that September 1st marks, get this, 10 years of DNA Today. We released our first episode back in 2012. And that's when I was starting my senior year of high school. So fast forward a decade, now I have my master's in genetics and have been practicing as a genetic counselor for 2 years. As a high schooler, I dreamed of reaching people around the world. Little did I think I would be producing DNA Today 10 years later with 2 podcast awards, ranking the top 1% of podcasts globally with over 40 sponsors. This journey has been incredible. We have had countless guests on the podcast that have brought immense insight into the field of genetics, the life of living with a genetic condition or caring for someone who does, groundbreaking advancements in genetic technology, discussions exploring the ethics surrounding this technology, and so many more important conversations. During this episode, we're looking back at the last 10 years and 200 episodes. We are featuring your voices of people that make this show possible, listeners, team members, guests, and more. So you're going to hear these voice memos sharing people's favorite episodes, followed by clips from that episode. Before we start, I really want to thank you so much. DNA Today would not be successful without you. It's your downloads, engagement, and support that keep this show going. We are so passionate about educating the world about genetics, and it's you that keeps us going, gives us fuel to be able to keep doing this. I am humbled by your support and honored to be in this role now for 10 years. So I'm already looking forward to the next decade of DNA Today and all the things that will change in genetics in these next 10 years. But before we get into that, let's reflect on the last 10 years.
My name is Corinne Merlino, and I'm the communications lead at DNA Today. My favorite episodes come from the fertility series that was released in the spring of 2020. During the COVID-19 pandemic, I was stuck at home and started listening to the podcast, and then started working with the podcast shortly after that. So those episodes always held a special place in my heart. And I love listening to DNA Today because it gives me the ability to explore all different topics in the areas of genetics and public health, all from the comfort of my headphones.
My name is Sophia Saladino, and I launched DNA Today's YouTube channel, starting with our lesson episodes and continuing with more recent shows so that you can enjoy them on YouTube as well as podcast players. My favorite series was Infertility, particularly episode 123, where Dr. Kara Goldman explained fertility testing and some causes of infertility. DNA Today contributes to the science, medicine, genetics, and podcasting communities by creating interesting, accessible content thoughtfully packed into themed episodes so that listeners can choose topics that pique their interest. Congratulations to DNA Today on these milestones.
In couples with recurrent miscarriage, one of the first parts of that workup is looking at a parental karyotype for both partners, looking for balanced translocations. And that's a particularly tough diagnosis. It's very reassuring to patients to have a diagnosis and have an explanation for their recurrent losses. And I think it helps the patients understand that there is no blame. It takes a lot of persistence and often many IVF cycles to achieve euploid chromosomes in their embryos. So it often can be a long road to get to a euploid embryo, but there is absolutely, an answer for those patients.
Hey, this is Ashlyn Anokian. I'm a prenatal genetic counselor at a high-risk pregnancy center. I made my DNA Today debut discussing genetic counseling match day and how to prepare for graduate school. I returned for the NSGC recap episodes in 2019 and 2020. Kira and I discussed standout sessions, including a lecture on teratogen exposures and the debate if all people diagnosed with breast cancer should have genetic testing. Interestingly enough, we both ended up in prenatal after graduation, but I totally called that early on. We also shared details from our poster presentation, which was adapted from our thesis work, exploring the impact of psychiatric genetic data on tort litigation and its relationship with stigma. Congrats on 10 years of DNA Today. What an achievement. It's been exciting watching your growth over the years. And Kira, you should be so proud of your success and your contribution to our community. Thanks for having me on.
I think we had a really unique and interesting study where we explored how judges may or may not be influenced by genetic evidence, specifically that was in relation to schizophrenia in the tort litigation space. So when you're thinking about civil court, where people are sued for negligence or violating a protected right, more that side of the system rather than the criminal court system that I feel like we all are more aware of, you kind of know and love in mainstream media, TV, that kind of side. Fun fact, this is actually the first study that analyzed this kind of relationship.
Hi, I'm Katie Lee, CGC, and my favorite episode of DNA Today is episode 131, where you talked with Libby Copeland and discussed ethical implications of direct-to-consumer testing. I like any episode that comes with a book review, and I especially like episodes that talk about ethical issues in genetic counseling.
If you're testing at one of the bigger companies, there have not been law enforcement implications for you unless you decided to go ahead and download your information and upload it to GEDmatch, for instance, and then opt into law enforcement searching.
My name is Amanda Andrioli, and I am the video lead for DNA Today. Having had the opportunity to edit and listen through DNA Today's episodes, my favorite was number 166. With genetic counselor and patient advocate Radhika Saw. She discussed beta thalassemia, its impact on her own life, and why donating blood is so vital. This episode inspired me to make my first ever blood donation. This is an example of why I love listening to DNA Today. I get to learn about ways to support diseases, feel engaged with the genetics community, and explore ethical dilemmas that coincide with genetic counseling.
In my early 20s, I was getting 2 units every 2 weeks. And that's more or less what a typical adult with beta thalassemia major goes for. They get blood, usually 2 units every 2 to 3 weeks. And everyone's slightly different depending on their mutation. So with beta thalassemia, you have 2 types of mutations. You have a beta null, where you produce absolutely no beta globin. And then you can have a beta plus, where you are producing some. So for me, both my mutations resulted in a beta null, so that I make absolutely no beta globin. The only normal hemoglobin I make is a little bit of fetal hemoglobin that we all make, right? So if I don't get blood transfusions, yeah, it's not going to be a pretty picture and I will eventually die. People who have 2 beta pluses have intermedia, and they will make a minimal amount of hemoglobin, so they actually do not need transfusions to live, but it definitely does improve their quality of life because they'll go around with a moderate anemia. And then there's people who are kind of in the middle who have a beta plus and a beta null mutation. So they're making just a little bit. Those people are mostly considered majors like me, but they may be able to go 3 weeks or 4 weeks between transfusions versus me who can only go 2 weeks. So it's definitely something you have to learn to schedule your life around. I actually was just there today, and see, I have my bandage on my hand, and I was there from say 9:45 till about 3:45. So I was there for a good 6 hours getting my blood, and I've tried to calculate how many units I've gotten over my lifetime. I'm 46 now, and I think I've gotten probably 1,800 units of blood.
Wow.
That's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot.
And I didn't realize how long it took to receive the transfusion. I figured, no experience with this myself of like, oh, it must just take an hour because when I've donated blood, that's, I'm not there for very long. Support for DNA Today comes from the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, also known as PETA, whose scientists have developed the Research Modernization Deal, a strategy to phase out ineffective experiments on animals with high-tech, state-of-the-art research. PETA has collected an abundance of evidence demonstrating that the use of animals in biomedical research hinders scientific progress and puts patients at risk. Learn more at peta.org/New Deal. Again, that's peta.org/New Deal. Did you know PerkinElmer Genomics was one of the first laboratories to offer whole genome sequencing on a clinical basis? Whole genome sequencing can maximize clinical diagnostic yield for patients. With turnaround time of 4 weeks for the proband sample, PerkinElmer's whole genome sequencing test is designed to provide access to additional valuable information compared to an exome. PerkinElmer also offers prenatal whole genome sequencing as well as ultra-rapid whole genome sequencing for critically ill newborns using dried blood spots. The ultra-rapid genome has a turnaround time of 5 days and includes mito, chromosomal CNV analysis, STR-TNR screening, and biochemical analysis. Also, listen back to episode 176 with Dr. Madhuri Hegde, where we explored the power of whole genome sequencing, which also happens to be one of my favorite episodes of DNA Today. And stay tuned for a couple more episodes with PerkinElmer soon. Discover all that PerkinElmer Genomics has to offer at PerkinElmerGenomics.com.
Hi, Kara. This is Daniel DeFabio. Congratulations on 200 episodes and 10 years of your podcast. I was on episode 67 in 2017, September. We talked about Menkes syndrome and the film festival I co-founded, Disorder, the Rare Disease Film Festival. And we also got into some of the films that covered SMA, USP7, HAE, EB, a lot of stuff. So congratulations again. Well done. Keep it up.
That was it. We got a diagnosis for my son that was a disorder we'd never heard of, Menkes disease, and all of a sudden you need to get educated on that very quickly, and then the news is so dire and you think what can be done. And luckily a good friend of mine from high school and college, Katie McLaren, told me about Rare Disease Day, and then she got me to join her at a mitochondrial disease walk. And I started to see how these communities were motivated and activated, and started to look for what could I do in that space. And, you know, some disorders, you can find a little bit more support that's already there. And lucky for us, the Menkes Foundation was already doing great work. And there was before Facebook, there was a Yahoo group, then it became a Facebook group of the families that are facing Menkes, so we could find each other and communicate with each other and compare notes and coordinate our efforts to increase awareness.
Hi, my name is Faith, and I've been listening to DNA Today for about a year now. I love how dedicated and passionate Kira and her guests are about the work they do. It is so inspiring and motivating as a young person to hear about such important topics. My favorite episode has to be the Parkinson's disease episode with Dr. Mata and Dr. Beck, particularly the conversation in which they discuss risk factors and the genes affected, as well as potential genetic predispositions for the disease. I also really appreciate the grad school application advice episodes as a current undergraduate student. Thank you so much.
What do we know right now, Dr. Mata, about the genes that do play a role in Parkinson's disease? Is there a list so far of what we've identified?
I think is a growing list, so it never stops. Every time I go give talks, I always have to keep updating the table, which is good, right? I would say that the genetics cause of Parkinson's is relatively new. I would say maybe 20 years or so. It was first believed to be mostly environmental. And then I think studying some of the original families with, like Jim said, with maybe a little bit earlier onset, which might suggest that has some genetic predisposition. Some of those families start, led to the researchers identifying the first gene was synuclein. The synuclein gene then came Parkin, and this was in 1997. So as I said, over 20 years ago, and then now we're up to maybe 23, 24 genes that cause familial forms, right? So that's one of the things, as Jim mentioned, from the clinical aspect, Parkinson's disease is very complex. And from the genetics, we see this complexity as well, with many genes in different pathways being affected. But on top of that, there's a lot of genetic risk factors. So the last study that came out a couple of years ago identified at least 78 genes that are also associated with risk. So they don't cause the disease, but increase somebody's risk to develop the disease as well. So again, there's a lot of players in the game.
My name is Laura Markham, and I was the first DNA Today team member to join Kira. My role in the team evolved from creating graphics for social media posts to developing a marketing strategy to reach a larger audience. My absolute favorite episode thus far is from the direct-to-consumer series number 128 with Dr. Adam Rutherford on his book, How to Argue with a Racist. This is why I love listening to the podcast, because it keeps me informed on the ever-changing landscape of genetics and its application in science, medicine, and culture. I'm sending a huge congratulations to Kira and the team of DNA Today on hitting such a huge milestone. I'm forever grateful to have been a small part of the magic and will continue being a loyal listener.
This is a result of a couple of centuries of slave traders breeding humans of African descent specifically for strength and speed. And as a result of that, they're better at these particular sports. Well, it seems like a reasonable hypothesis. Trouble is, you look at the data, and it's just not true.
Hi, my name is Paloma, and I'm a genetic counselor at Fulgent Genetics. I've been listening to DNA Today since 2018, and I absolutely love how informative it's been for helping me learn about the different aspects in the genetic counseling career. Some of my favorite episodes include number 174, Pharmacogenomics with Fulgent Genetics, because I feel like this is a really new and exciting field. Number 87, Genetic Counseling Grad School Apps, because I feel like that really helped me get into genetic counseling school. And number 110, Gattaca 22 Years Later, because that is my favorite movie of all time. Thank you so much, DNA Today.
These people who were genetically perfect, Jerome Morrow, in the film he chooses to go by Eugene. He says, yes. Please call me Eugene,
yeah, that's a nice touch.
Which is impossible to take away from the fact that that really sounds like eugenics, right?
Definitely.
And so when we're having this discussion, it's impossible to separate out when we talk about genetic perfection or imperfection. Are we talking about our history of eugenics? Are we talking about what a future that's eugenic could look like?
What is the true goal of genetic perfection? Yeah, are you talking about just genetic diseases? Because Vincent's parents at one point say that they don't want to filter anything out but diseases. Looking at like, all right, what's the goal that we have here with this genetic perfection? And everyone's going to have their own idea of what that is.
We're already really kind of amplifying what it means to be human. And is that wrong or is it right?
Hi, DNA Today listeners. My name is Talia Sanford, and I am a current Sarah Lawrence student in the Human Genetics program, and I will be graduating in May 2023. And I have been listening to DNA Today for about 2 years now. And what I love about the show is how Kira brings in voices within the genetics community, all the way from students through teachers, genetic counselors themselves, researchers, innovators, and patients too, all culminating to this beautiful podcast. And my favorite episode was actually episode number 87. And I remember exactly where I was when I was listening to it. I can picture it in my head so clearly. It was right after I graduated college. And during my senior year, I had applied to 7 programs and I got no interviews. I had no prospects and I was distraught. I had worked so hard on my applications and my prereqs and my essay and everything, and I didn't get anything back. And the last 3 months of my senior year happened to turn completely upside down as March of 2020 brought COVID into the world. And incredibly, it actually led me to an experience that I never would have had before, which brings me to where I was when I was listening to this episode. That year, 2020 to 2021, I got the opportunity to intern with the genetic counselors and doctors at Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem, Israel. And it was around December, January time that I had already submitted all my applications and the waiting game had begun. And one day I was taking a nice long walk in Jerusalem and I listened to this episode during this waiting game time. And I was listening to this episode of all the current students talking about their application experiences And I specifically remember one person saying that she had applied to all of these programs and places around the country, and she only got one interview. And she then got into that program. But she kept emphasizing that you only need one. And I think in this world of program matches in genetic counseling programs, we forget how true that is. And especially for me, because I had applied to 11 programs that year because I wanted to get into any program so badly. And like this person, it ended up being that I only got one interview. And again, throughout that waiting period, I kept thinking back to that person. And it terrified me at first. But I really kept telling myself, like she said, I only need one. I only need one. And thankfully, it worked out. And I got into Sarah Lawrence, and I'm so grateful to Sarah Lawrence for giving me this opportunity. And I think if there's listeners out there to get anything from this long story, it's to trust yourself, be confident in yourself, and to never give up, and to know that it really only takes one school.
How we prepared for applications. But one thing I really want to say was helpful for me was the Journal of Genetic Counseling. I subscribed to it, and I found it really helpful because it kind of just got me up to date with the current events and research in the field. And it helped me with the, lingo in the interviews. It helped me have fluent conversations about what I know about the field.
Another helpful one is about geneticcounselors.com. There's a lot of free information on there because you can actually watch simulated sessions with genetic counselors.
One thing I looked for, and this is something I jotted down immediately after the interview, is what did the relationship look like between the current students, because we got to meet them at a lot of mine, and the program directors. Did it seem like it was a positive and comfortable relationship or a strained one?
This is a shocking statistic. The National Institutes of Health, or NIH, the world's largest funder of biomedical research, squanders an estimated $200 billion of taxpayer money every year on ineffective animal experiments for human diseases. The NIH reports that failure rates for novel drugs occur in about 95% of human studies, despite showing success in preclinical experiments using animals. Animals and humans deserve better, which is why scientists for the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, aka PETA, have developed new strategies for replacing the use of animals in experiments with human-relevant methods. Advances in human-relevant research technologies hold tremendous promise to revolutionize biomedical research and usher in the age of personalized medicine, a topic we explore extensively on DNA Today. Head over to peta.org/New Deal to learn more. Again, that's peta.org/New Deal. PerkinElmer Genomics is a global leader in genetic testing, focusing on rare diseases, inherited disorders, newborn screening, and hereditary cancer. Testing services support the full continuum of care from preconception and prenatal to neonatal, pediatric, and adult. Testing options include sequencing for targeted genes, multiple genes, the whole exome or genome, and copy number variations. Using a simple saliva or blood sample, PerkinElmer Genomics answers complex genetic questions that can proactively inform patient care and end the diagnostic odyssey for families. Learn more at PerkinElmerGenomics.com.
Hi, my name is Sani Tanaiker, and I serve as an outreach intern for DNA Today. One of my favorite episodes is 191, Overturning Roe v. Wade with Laura Hersher. This episode highlights the interrelation between genetics, policy, and legislation. I love this show because it's so accessible, and I love hearing all of the guest speakers and seeing how connected the rare disease community is. I'm so honored to be a part of this team and celebrating DNA Today's 10-year anniversary and 200th episode.
My name is Kajal Patel, and I am a senior at the University of Maryland and an intern for DNA Today. My favorite episode is 191 with Laura Hersher because of the open discussion about women's rights and how overturning Roe v. Wade impacts genetic counseling. My favorite part about listening to DNA Today is hearing honest conversations about experts in the field of genetic counseling and how it is constantly changing.
Honestly, I'm worried for the mental health of genetic counselors in these situations, like advocating for people in situations where they know that these people are going through hell, either because the pregnancy is not viable or the person's health is at risk and they're frightened and scared and stuff. Imagine over and over again being in that position and having, people tell you, no, we can't do anything. It's very frustrating and upsetting.
Hello, my name is Mahfouz. I'm a student of biotechnology in Russia. My favorite episode is literally the first episode I listened to on DNA Radio, which is the episode where she interviewed Lauren Porter. I guess that's episode 176. And since that episode, I haven't missed a single episode till today, and I've been a big fan of DNA Radio since that time. Yeah. Also, why I enjoy listening to DNA Radio is because it's very informative, and it also gives this opportunity to listen to experienced scientists and people with knowledge in this field. So it's a place I get really efficient knowledge, and yeah, Kira Denny is a good host.
I am ecstatic to introduce our guest, Lauren Potter, who you might know as Becky Jackson from the TV show Glee. She was in all 6 seasons, playing a character who, like her, has Down syndrome.
Well, like I said, Kara, Down syndrome gives me an extra chromosome. That extra little piece of material in my cells means that I have worked harder and longer to do most people do quickly. For example, it really took me 2 years to learn how to walk, but I did learn how to read when I was 5 years old, and thank goodness my family taught me to sign language. That was amazing. It was really impressive. But when I was an infant, because talking took years before people outside of my family could understand me and understand what I'm saying.
For more information about today's episode, visit dnapodcast.com, where you can also stream all episodes of the show. We encourage your questions, comments, guest pitches, and ideas. Send them all into info@dnapodcast.com. Search DNA Today on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, so you can connect with us there. And a favor, please rate and review the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. This truly helps us climb the charts and allow more genetic nerds like yourself to find the show. DNA Today is hosted and produced by myself, Kira Deneen. Our social media lead is Corinne Merlino. Our video lead is Amanda Andrioli. Thanks for listening, and join us next time to discover new advances in the world of genetics.
The genes of you and me, the genes of you and me are all made of DNA. We're all made of the same chemical DNA.